Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Everybody, thanks for joining in. Thank you for taking time out for attending another interesting session with us. Welcoming you all to Insights with upGrad, and really happy to have Professor Sheth as today's speaker and Karan as today's moderator. If you can see me and hear me properly, just type a hi in the chat box. It would be great to know if you can. Okay, I can see Ang raising his hand. I guess that's a yes to being able to see and hear me properly. And thank you. Very quickly, two basic set of instructions before we begin the session. If you have any disturbances or any issues with the audio and video, do type it in the chat box. And if you want the moderator to pick up any question for today's session, please type it in the Q&A box. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Karan.
Thanks, Medha. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We have a real treat for you all today. I have here with me Professor Jagdish Sheth from Emory University, and what a pleasure to have him. I'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll dive in. But first and foremost, thank you, Professor Sheth, for making the time to be here. So Professor Jagdish Sheth is the Carl H. Kalstad Professor of Business at Koizleta Business School at Emory University. He's globally known for his scholarly contributions in consumer behavior, relationship marketing, competitive strategy, and geopolitical analysis. He's taught and researched for over 50 years at the University of Southern California, UIUC, Columbia University, MIT, and Emory. Dr. Sheth is the recipient of the 2020 Padma Bhushan Award for Literature and Education, one of the highest civilian awards given by the government of India. It's incredible. He's a fellow of the Academy of International Business, the Association of Consumer Research, the American Psychological Association, and the American Marketing Association. He is a distinguished fellow of the Academy of Marketing Science and the International Engineering Consortium. He's the recipient of all 4 top awards given by the American Marketing Association, and he has received the Global Innovation Award and Marion Creekmore Award, both from Emory University. Dr. Sheth has been an advisor to numerous corporations all over the world, authored and co-authored more than 350 papers and numerous books. He's the founder for the Center of Telecommunications Management at the University of Southern California, founder and chairman of India, China, and America Institute, which analyzes the trilateral relationship and its impact on geopolitics, security, trade, and investment, and is the founder and chairman of the Academy of Indian Marketing, which supports research and scholarship among Indian scholars in marketing and management. Wow, welcome, Professor Sheth. We are so fortunate to have you with us today. We're going to cover a wide array of topics based on your expertise. As an educator, I think you'd be able to provide an interesting perspective to many of our listeners who are at the moment might be making a decision about career or education. And so we'll cover a few different topics, but welcome and a pleasure to have you here. Welcome from the upGrad team.
Thank you so much, Karan, for inviting me. And I'm so glad to be here. upGrad is a great institution in terms of online global education. And I think some of the topics we can touch about the MBA program will relate to that globalization aspects, online education aspect. So I'm looking forward to having our conversation.
Thank you. Great. I'll dive right in if that's okay. I think many of our attendees today might be early to kind of mid-career here, and they're probably wondering when the right time is to pursue an MBA. So you talked a little bit about digitalization, but you teach obviously at Emory, and I believe you teach both maybe the undergrad and graduate programs. What advice would you give to someone who's listening today about making the decision whether it's the right time or not to pursue an MBA?
Yeah. MBA would be necessary if you wanted to change the career of specialization that you got at your undergraduate, let's say it's software engineering or IT services, or even a medical degree. In India, it's MBBS is very common, or an undergraduate law degree. If you wanted to change your career into management consultancy, if you wanted to change the career more into strategy consultancy, MBA is almost a must now. You have to have an MBA. In fact, in the US data, 75% of MBA graduates from top universities all go into consulting or investment banking. Those are the two primarily. MBA was not designed for that. It was designed for engineers right after graduation to get 2 years of management language. What's accounting, double entry system. So if you look at the first year curriculum of MBA, it is really just learning languages of business. Supply chain, demand, supply, equilibrium, economic concepts. That's really just general knowledge. And that becomes very relevant as you go into consultancy because you have been trained so narrowly and now you have to touch with so many inside the client, many different people, you feel comfortable. MBA gives you that knowledge or a platform at least. So that's clearly one. In many other cases, MBA may not be necessary. Here are the reasons. If you already have an undergraduate business degree, I think there is no need for an MBA. It does not add an enormous value. It may add a value later on in your career when you are a senior executive, because at that time, quite often, surprisingly, to get into the senior most level, like a CEO of a company, it might be desirable to have the MBA degree, but it's not necessary, as in the consultancy business that I talked about. The MBA degree, unfortunately, is quite expensive, which is a problem. And there are no fellowships generally for MBA degrees. And therefore, you have to invest significant amount of money at a very good private university in the US, for example. It'll be at least about $100,000 of cost. And nowadays, the more common requirement is that in addition to your undergraduate education from a good university with good scores, you really have to have 4 or 5 years of work experience. Somehow business schools, private business schools like MIT, Wharton, Northwestern, Emory believe having that experience in the real world enables the professors to give you and impart the knowledge, and you can learn a lot more. So that's really the background of MBA, but I can answer other questions related to that if you have any.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great overview, and that's interesting that was the origin of the MBA. I didn't realize. How should folks think about specialization? You obviously are a leader in the field of marketing. How should folks think about when they're pursuing an MBA, the necessity or lack thereof to go down a particular track or path within the MBA program?
The MBA program has shifted over time. Let me give the background. In the early 60s, when the MBA was designed in the late 50s primarily, early 60s, 90% or more will be engineers. Then we began to shift in the 70s when very smart liberal arts students began to go for MBA rather than do masters in sociology or political science or humanities or philosophy, because there were no jobs after the first energy crisis. But they were smart people. So they could ace on the GMAT exam or GRE exam, the entrance exam, and they had good grades. So they began to join. So the mix of the students changed dramatically in the 80s, essentially. And then mix changed even further when the universities, especially Harvard University, began to start to say, we need more experienced people, 3, 4, 5 years of work experience, primarily because many students from Harvard MBA program and followed by Wharton, followed by Northwestern, which are large campuses, and they were all going into consulting business, where as a consultant, you are a revenue generator. And as a consultant, therefore, you need credibility of the institution, but also the work experience. It changed dramatically. And I will add one more thing. In the meanwhile, the universities learned to offer evening MBA working professionals rather than give up your career or a job and come full-time. and also offered executive MBA, weekend MBA for senior management. All those options were there to grow the revenue. In fact, among graduate degrees, MBA degree in the US at least is the largest graduation even today. Now it is plateauing a little. Now the focus has shifted. So going forward, which is our interest here, the better for an employability viewpoint, other than consultancy that we talked about, more you need to go for specialized MBA. Specialized MBA is in many ways like the MS programs in the old days for 18 months. Here it is MS custom management, it's very interesting. So combining the hybrid, so you get the basic management knowledge in your first year, but then second year or first semester only, and another 4 semesters. Next 3 semesters, we are deep diving into a super specialization almost. I mean, you can go and specialize having an MBA in sales management, or MBA in investment banking, or MBA, not just broad-based, but I mean, not just marketing, but I'm talking about very specialized aspect, or digital marketing, or data analytics, something like that. That's very popular. So if you're thinking about doing MBA in the future, go for an institution that is very well known for a specialized MBA. And we all are segmenting the market. So one university may specialize in one topic, let's say entrepreneurship or something. Other may specialize in something else altogether, finance, whatever it is. It's basically to segment, not to compete in many ways.
I see. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And we're seeing also MBAs land. So you mentioned management consulting and banking. And the trends that I think I've seen online are also increasing number of MBAs landing in tech industries. So yes. Google all of a sudden is just as powerful an MBA recruiter as Goldman Sachs has historically been, which is a new phenomenon. And that may put additional interest in specialization because you might want to focus on analytics or a field that is more in tune with that industry.
No, thanks for pointing out, Karan, that point. The new enterprises and industries are your biggest bet. Usually a good MBA will go in a corporation, either in the finance department or in marketing department. That thing is now changing enormously. As I mentioned, the growth is always in the high-tech Silicon Valley companies, or the FANG as they call it in the stock market, for example. And if you look at the S&P 500 index and the comparable index like FTSE in London or Tokyo, anywhere you look at it, the top market valuation companies are all technology companies. Out of the top 10 in America, 7 of them are all technology companies. And they're growing more and more, crowding out the traditional companies like General Electric, for example, which is unthinkable. But General Electric is almost like a corporation of yesterday, not a corporation of tomorrow, which is, it's just unthinkable that in more than 2 decades or 3 decades, we have transitioned from industrial manufacturing companies to more and more technology companies as the future. And healthcare is coming along at the same time. So you are right, absolutely, that I think those are your new places. So you need to therefore specialize or get certificate, if nothing else, in those areas, where you will be more important.
That's great. Yeah, very aligned with that view. You mentioned the evening programs and other initiatives that universities have taken against just the traditional MBA. Obviously, upGrad offers our online programs, which are yet another version. My question to you is, what do students sort of miss from a full-time in-person program if they choose any of these alternate paths? And what sort of are there things you would say that are sort of not that big of a transition if they choose to do an evening or online program, or are you a proponent more of the full-time program?
I think the key difference is that in a regular 2-year full-time program, you begin to socially bond with each other as friends, as we do at the undergraduate level. But this happens more at a master's level, more mature age, etc. In fact, it's not unusual to find your future soulmate quite often through the MBA programs nowadays, And quite often it is possible that you are married, one spouse is working, supporting you to do your MBA, and then the spouse takes the turn to do his or her MBA. Not uncommon. So it's just the average age maybe 27, 28. It's more socialization and creating friendship for tomorrow, which usually does not happen as well on the online programs, unfortunately, or even the evening MBA programs, because you come, you learn your things. We try to put them into teams, etc. It can be done, but it is not the same as being in person at the same time. I do want to mention that there are alternatives to MBA, clearly. It's not as if MBA is the only degree option, and the alternatives are several. For example, you can go for MS degrees, and many universities are now creating separate MS degree programs, which says that you come here to specialize, where it's very common in engineering, obviously, to do an MS before PhD. I think something similar, we are thinking about more MS in finance, MS in marketing, MS in data analytics, whatever turns out to be, and out of which MS in data analytics is very popular. But 18 months you take time out. I think we can also believe very strongly that if you cannot physically come, there are very good online MS degree programs. Very possible. There are also online MBA programs, highly respected. So you have the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, combined with other universities. But the most successful one I've seen online degree program, MBA alone, but online, is University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I taught for many years. They decided they are just not able to compete on the daytime program. It's just not like Michigan, Ross School of Business. Illinois did not have that power base. So they decided they will go online. And I'm just amazed, in less than 3-4 years, there are like 5,000 MBA students from all over the world.
Yeah,
and they graduate 3 times, and you get the same degree as a regular MBA. You can come to the campus and go through commencement, cap and gown, and all that stuff pretty much. So apparently it is possible to transition from the physical to digital, or brick and mortar to non-brick and mortar. It's very possible. But online programs also have great opportunity for certificate programs. Sometimes all you need is a certification, not a full degree, depending on your time, affordability, etc., which is another option. So the online offers more options, and it does not intervene in your life, like giving up everything and coming to the campus, relocating the family. Because if you are mid-career, you are working spouse, you have your spouse working, you are working. It's not easy to unwind someplace and rewind some other place. It's much harder. So online is becoming more an alternative and more popular actually in the process.
No doubt, Professor, and that's great insight. As you described, the concept between certificates and an MBA, one thought came to mind is if you're really just looking for the core skills, the base package of analytics, how do I run a discounted cash flow? How do I develop a marketing plan? Maybe a certificate can help you get those core skills. But if you're looking to do additional research, if you're looking to take advanced classes within the same domain, then perhaps a full master's is better suited for what you're trying to do. Would you say that's how people should decide between a certificate and a master's program?
I think you're absolutely right. It's basically the same. I will rephrase what you are saying. To me, if you want to have a know-how, how to do it, then a certificate is quite good. However, if you want to know why, an explanation, a theory, a framework, then a degree program is much more necessary.
That's fantastic.
And know how, know why.
Yeah, I think that delineation is simple and very helpful for people to now make like a framework around their decision.
Exactly.
So Professor Sheth, I'd like to maybe switch gears a little bit. We've been talking about management and management education, and one of the concepts that you've pioneered and pushed to the top in the realm of marketing is the idea of customer centricity.
Yes.
I find it an incredibly exciting concept, and would just love to give our audience a view as to what it is and how it can benefit organizations to really internalize and promote it. So I'd love to start with a basic definition. In your opinion, what would you define in a simplistic way? What is customer centricity?
Customer centricity in its simplest way is taking an external view internally. Otherwise, an internal view by different disciplines, engineering, R&D, manufacturing, supply chain, etc. So this takes an external view as a common denomination across all of the functional disciplines. It is also saying that ultimately you will need to focus more on the revenue side, not just on the cost side. And the revenue generator for you is the customer. At one time, customers were like a mass market. You did not have to segment them. You did not have to do one-on-one marketing kind of stuff. But today with technology capability, it is becoming more and more desirable and necessary to have one-to-one marketing essentially, because each individual customer may have unique needs, but definitely constraints and requirements. And how do you understand that? This is very obvious in a B2B market, business to business market, where you have the key account management, for example, where you have the global account management, for example. Many of the Indian IT services companies have global accounts worldwide because you're serving them not just in one country, but many countries. But it is happening now more in consumer markets, which is fascinating. Consumer markets were all defined by mass market concepts, You go through physical distribution, but today more and more companies can go direct to the consumer on online platforms or go through market exchanges. And since data are recorded at the individual level, there are massive information about each individual customer, their buying patterns. And like everything else in consumer markets, buying pattern is very predictable because we all buy through habit. Once the habits are formed, we repeat, and hence there's a good predictive analytics in the process. So in that case, you are reducing your cost by not targeting your advertising dollars or your distribution dollars to mass market like a shotgun, but I can take a very rifle approach. Now, what I do personally just to have fun is that often I go online with a company, something, and I intentionally browse in a certain way to see whether their bot or artificial intelligence is tracking me. And I just stop before making the order intentionally to see if they will give me some inducement, some incentive to close the deal. That's a typical sales process, but it's done online. And I enjoy it. I tell you, the artificial intelligence is becoming so real now that those guys can anticipate exactly what's the next thing I'm planning to do in my sequence of activities. So I just have a fun, like people have fun on video games. I have fun on which is
I'm sure there's an analyst at that firm just looking at tracking your behavior, trying to say, what will it take to get Professor Sheth to convert? And they're sending you new offers, right? It's intelligent marketing, knowing that there's probably a point at which you will finally make that purchase, right?
Customer centricity has so many benefits if you do it right. And genuinely, authenticity is very important and transparency is important. If you believe in customer centricity, you cannot simply do it in a secret manner. You cannot do it. You really have to. The biggest benefit is that it now becomes the focal point within the organization. So you don't have these tough wars between manufacturing and engineering, between engineering and marketing and sales even. I think everybody unites around a common cause. Which is, it definitely makes it more efficient. But customers are biggest influencers to other customers, word of mouth communication. You get an enormous benefit out of that one. And on social media, word of mouth really is very important. One tweet by somebody can actually make a whole change about your company's perception in the marketplace. And now we have the whole influencer marketing growing. Influencers are no longer opinion leaders or celebrities, or Hollywood, Bollywood type people. Today, ordinary people by having something on TikTok or YouTube suddenly become celebrities and have hundreds of thousands of followers. And therefore that becomes a different channel. So in many ways, this perspective, customer centricity is very important.
Very, very true. And I want to, you've mentioned, Professor, in prior interviews that customer centricity feels intuitive, right? When you're speaking about it, it feels like the right thing for any business to undertake. But you've also talked about it being challenging to make it pervasive within an organization. Can you talk about why organizations have a hard time coming about and making it a part of their fabric?
Two reasons. One, we organized in the industrial age everything from a value add viewpoint. We calculated GDP from a value add from industrial raw material, agricultural raw material to a consumable product, essentially, right? And everything else in between that you need, like chemicals or whatever you need. So our whole system is organized from raw material to finished product to the consumer. Here you're trying to reverse everything. So your processes are not in place from a reversing viewpoint. And I'll tell you some examples. Newer industries are all doing it, where you start with the customer first and a customer journey, and you back into your production area or fulfillment area, at least, if nothing else. Like Uber, for example, would be in that category. Uber is there waiting for you, but you initiate as a consumer that I need a ride share. And then based upon that, they have an algorithm to figure out who is available, right? Which is the inventory of drivers in the car, just goes on, and you do the fulfillment, which is like a reverse flow. Most companies are not organized for the reverse flow, which is why brick and mortar companies have a hard time doing online or what is called omni-channel offering, online offering. That's clearly one. But bigger problem, which we have never understood, is that all of our accounting is organized from the raw material to value add.
Yeah.
So your accounting itself has to change dramatically now, where customer becomes the center of accounting understanding. They are starting new activity-based costing, as it is called, which is a newer technique that says, look at activities surrounding each customer you are serving, so you know where your margins are, where your profits are, etc. And if you can do that, but it's not as yet mainstream. Accounting rules have not changed dramatically, at least at the individual nation level, but even on a global level. So international financial reporting, for example, which is now becoming standard between the German, the British, and the American standards for accounting, I think accounting profession can bring about a massive change. And there are only about 5-7 big accounting firms who, if they can collaborate together and go through the regulatory process, because financial statements are fiduciary, that means whoever is signing is held accountable, both criminally as well as civilian penalties. So given that accounting firms are the most critical people, for example, transfer pricing. Biggest debates right now are on transfer pricing, especially between nations. Depending upon the tax, if you have a lower tax in one country, you will have a transfer pricing mechanism in one way. If you have a high tax, you will do it differently within the organization. So I think that's very key. So I think those are the two reasons. The way we got organized in the industrial age, and we are almost post-industrial age, and the way accounting is calculated.
And I think the accounting side that you mentioned also links to the turf wars that you mentioned earlier, right? Because if you create all these cost centers within an organization, then everyone is trying to show profitability in a different way rather than coming together around the consumer activity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is a great, great antidote to turf wars. And every company I work for, and I work for hundreds of companies easily in different industries, there's always one culture dominates. Some companies R&D driven, so manufacturing guys are not as respected. Some countries manufacturing driven, supply chain is not respected. Some companies may be supply chain driven, marketing is not respected. If marketing is respected, sales guys are marginalized. So there are internal turf wars. There's a neutral body, a customer perspective that equalizes. All of them are now on an equal footing. There is no superiority of one culture dominating the company altogether. which is another reason. You are right. I mean, I hear stories after stories as to how, with good intentions by senior most leaders, chairman of the company and the CEO, trying to bring about a customer centricity, especially in B2B markets, like a Nortel, for example, or Lucent. These are all telephone manufacturing companies. I have much a hard time. Often it requires an outsider, like at IBM. It was still there. IBM is a great corporation, but they did not have a customer centricity. It took a change in leadership from outside, like Google, Lou Gerstner, who came in, brought the customers a perspective, and even live customers in every debate discussion. And when customers begin to say something, people begin to listen more.
That's incredible. Are you saying he brought in actual customers into the company discussions and meetings?
Absolutely, in strategic planning discussions to bring in customers. Wow. I did a workshop for maybe 60, 70 sessions at Ameritech, one of the telephone companies, where we interviewed consumer customers. We interviewed small business customers because everybody is a customer of a telephone company. But large enterprise customers, we brought the chief information officer, CIO, to come and say, what is it that the company is doing right or wrong? And we made sure that the sales executive in charge of the account is not penalized, because the problems were not with the salesperson, but the friction within the company itself. Within the company, in the delivery, for example, mechanism, the frictions were always there, which was affecting the customer. And they said, look, we love your brand name, we love your product category, but the way you do business, your processes just do not become compatible. And can I take one more example? Is
Please.
Okay?
Yes.
I mean, this is really the start of a very good long-term relationship between Walmart and Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble is a world-class company. Their brands are just outstanding, but they are divided by product lines. Each division has their own supply chain. Walmart wants streamlined inventory management because they're organized around warehousing and satellite system, VSAT as we call it, small satellite. They're very efficient in the last mile kind of a notion. And they're a nightmare. In fact, nobody at P&G knew at one time who is the single largest customer, because they're so consumer centric, end consumers. And Walmart was the largest buyer, which was not even on the radar screen. So Sam Walton himself, the founder, and that their management simply said, look, we are becoming inefficient because of your supply, the way you do it. We love your brand names. We can promote them in rural markets, but we need to understand your supply chain, your warehousing, your IT systems, our IT system, to see if they're compatible, to reduce all the friction, as I call it, that happens between a customer and a supplier. And it worked. From like $500 million business, we had a center that talked about this one or researched it. It grew to like 5 billion very quickly. And in fact, I think Walmart became the largest customer of Procter & Gamble on a global basis, because Walmart has gone into other countries like Canada, Mexico, and China, I think also. So now you become a supplier all over the world, wherever Walmart is there, for example. Great symbiotic relationship between two corporations to create a collaborative effort, as opposed to a transactional where you negotiate price and delivery. In a business to business, very common. Here we can create value together.
Yeah. And then solving the concerns that Walmart has becomes the North Star for all functions. And all of a sudden IT, all of a sudden supply chain, everyone is interacting because Walmart becomes the person you're solving for. It is treated like the individual customer would be, but in this case, it's B2B.
And if you're a very good supplier, you can really understand your whole strategy can be shaped by one of those large mega accounts.
Yeah.
If Walmart is looking for higher margin products, then you basically divest low margin commodity brands that you have and instead buy higher margins. So for example, Procter & Gamble began to buy personal care products, perfumes, aftershave lotion. Giorgio was a brand name, oil of Olay, and of course they bought Gillette, as you remember, which was everybody criticized why P&G is paying such high price, but they shifted the distribution system to a Walmart where you can now, Walmart gets a much higher margin product because they want more margin because they have the volume. It's a typical balancing act. So it becomes much more a strategic long-term relationship. And I'll tell you, the one that I have studied and I admire, probably one of the longest strategic relationship, at least my encounter, my experience, has been between Whirlpool Corporation, the appliance maker, and Sears Roebuck. 70 years or 90 years now, probably that long. Totally symbiotic, including open books. So Whirlpool passed completely. Kenmore brand is the Sears brand. So now we have two brand strategy, the Whirlpool brand on the one hand, which is a volume brand, and a Kenmore, you dominate the market and you get a manufacturing efficiency. Very symbiotic, very strategic relationship over time. And very few other suppliers have been able to break into the Sears market, for example, which is a large market, even though unfortunately Sears is not the future right now, it looks like. But
yeah, that's right. When you were talking about Uber and some of the other examples you gave, some companies, especially tech firms, often think of themselves or project themselves as product first.
yes.
Do you think this is at all at odds with customer centricity, or do you think they can work in harmony together? Because some folks say, well, if I build the right product or the perfect product, the customers will come. How do you kind of speak to those companies when you're advising them, where the product team or the tech team is at the forefront of everything?
Right. Actually, it is a debate created unnecessarily because the most consumer-centric company is Apple. But they look at end user and they bring all that knowledge of the end user in your hardware design as well as in your software capability. They have both of them, as you know, and they begin to create products accordingly. I mean, Bengt & Olufsen, a Swedish company, they did the same thing. So good engineers always have the end user perspective, the interface between human and machine, for example. Design is very important. So in many companies, chief design officer is more critical in the process. So to me, it's a blending of the two that happens always. Product sells pretty much, as opposed to saying that I invented something because of a necessity and because of that you will buy, which may have a short-term advantage. To sustain long-term advantage, you need both the end user perspective, which I find happens much more in the laboratories. R&D people are more aware because they don't talk about the customer who is the buyer, but they talk about the customer who is the user of the product. So everything after sales, what happens to the product, in consumption, for example. And in that case, so I think this is a false dichotomy.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. What are you mentioned Apple being the most customer-centric organization. What are other signs as a consumer, if we are having experiences interacting with companies, what are signs that we are interacting with a very customer-centric company? Is it a positive experience with customer service, or is it something in the product, or is it all of our interactions showcase that?
Excellent point. There are two dimensions, clearly. One has to do with the physical product or the physical service offering. The physical product would be an automobile, could be an appliance, for example, could be consumer electronics like television or cell phone, whatever they are. How do I feel in using it? Do I have to do some extra effort, or the product does it for me? Not only that, but the product is smart enough to anticipate more and more, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's clearly one. So to me, one part is the product. The other part is not the product, but the people who serve the product. People who sell the product to you, people who post-sales provide a customer support. And that's where most companies fail. Most companies have great products, but they may not have good enough salespeople who can put themselves in your shoes as a consumer customer. Now, specialty retailers do that. So if you go to Foot Locker, you're an athletic shoe like a Nike, the person as a sales clerk is very knowledgeable about what does it take to wear the shoes, not to sell the shoes, because all of them have to be active in two sports. They have worn out more Nike than you will ever consume.
Wow.
So they are more consultants, not just, so they enable you to think through what will happen to the product after you buy, how will you take care of it, all that stuff. So that kind of a knowledge is very valuable as a value add. And volume-driven companies such as self-service companies or even department stores do not have that kind of a capability. They don't have the product knowledge from an experience viewpoint. So specialty retailing usually does a good job. And there are similar counterparts where product has to coexist into the customer environment, like in a B2B, a chemical that you offer as an agricultural chemical has to go into the soil. And I work for many ag companies, so I understand now properly. And therefore, what does it happen in the usage by nutrition usage by the soil, the plant, and how does it have long-term impact, positive or negative, side effects of a drug, essentially, in many ways. I think those things are very important, which usually can happen. So there's a second dimension is the sales process. And ultimately, if customer feels everything is working fine if it is frictionless. There is no friction, which is why I try to say, but the Amazon platform or Uber platforms are frictionless. It does so many things for me, and therefore I become addicted to Uber, for example. It becomes so convenient. My God, they give you a receipt, they give you everything pretty much. They even allocate a better driver or a car based on your ratings. Are you a good customer? It's a perfect matchmaking almost kind of stuff. And I said, as a scholar, I analyze it, of course, and I try to understand. And I think, why am I so loyal to these guys? I find that it's basically, they take my life easier and easier pretty much.
That's it's incredible when an organization that is that is built on profits, but it's actually adding so much value to your life that you're almost thankful to this organization that they exist, right?
And there's one more point there, I think, Karan, we need to emphasize. Today, all of us are driven as much by time scarcity, time short, because we are working spouses, growing children. It's so hard to take care. And now you give me a hassle, like a repairman who will come, wait for me for the whole day. And you are saying, well, you gotta be kidding. Why would I wait for you all day? I have no time like that. Give me a precise time, maybe half an hour increment, quarterly increment. That is another key point, you see? Don't burden me. So here is the strangest statistics I find. During the COVID, of course, we were not allowed to go and see the doctors. So the doctors had to come to the home through Zoom, televisit, as it's called.
Right.
1 billion televisits took place in 2020. I can't believe the number still. I think there's a rounding error someplace. More importantly, people love it. They say, I don't have to get up and dress up to go outside, drive my car, put in the parking, fight for a parking space in a metro area, pay for the ticket, walk over, and then I see all these other people who may have other diseases. I don't know what it is. I've got a phobia now. So today the waiting line on televisit is longer than meeting in person. Isn't that interesting?
Unbelievable. I had a personal experience with that telemedicine visit and I loved it. I mean, it was in and out, 15 minutes. No one's waiting for anyone. There's no lobbies and waiting rooms. The
doctor is usually, doctor doesn't wait because they're driven by the Zoom technology. You have to do it like, it's like a machine production now for them also.
It's a win-win in my opinion. That was fantastic. I want to just quickly mention, so we talked about product versus this. I want to talk about culture because there's a resurgence of driving performance through good company culture. And I want to talk about how customer centricity fits into that framework. Think of it, my question is really more like a nurture versus nature thing. I mean, do you think about customer centricity needs to go into hiring as well? And so beyond the culture that we see on the surface, which is free food and snacks for employees, team building activities. Those are all the surface level cultural things. But deeply kind of rooted beneath that is the values of an organization. Can you just talk about how customer centricity goes into the HR side of things and building a company's people?
Yeah, no, there's no question that especially try to recruit younger generation, the Z age, or the millenniums even, all of them are now looking for something more than just wages, salaries, a bonus, and a career path. They're saying, what am I doing in a company is meaningful or not meaningful? Am I making a difference in a society in general? Surprisingly, that's the same thing customers are saying, when I consume your product, am I contributing to a societal welfare, or am I actually a polluter of the societal welfare? They want a meaning in consumption as the talent wants a meaning in work. So how do you now create a culture where the meaning or the purpose of the organization is more than just seeking profits? So you become not a profit-seeking, but a purpose-seeking organization. And I have a book on this one called Forms of Endearment with my colleague Raj Sisodia, which led to conscious capitalism movement. And we conclusively showed that if your culture is beyond shareholder value obsession, actually financially you do better than companies that are shareholder driven, which is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
He says if you serve your society better, your employees better, your customers better, and especially your suppliers, which is my worry, because we do not treat suppliers with respect. We do not admire how great suppliers can contribute value to us more and more. So I'm very much a supplier advocate person. My colleagues were employee advocate person, for example, customer. So here it rises above the plane. So the role changes beyond just being a buyer and a seller. Now you have a common cause. So the bonding is much more meaningful and long lasting, just like in any marriage. There's something that bonds two of you rather than bringing two paychecks, for example. There's something like raising good kids. There's a value there. Or serving society. Both of us would like to serve the society, NGO, kind of stuff. Whatever turns out to be, the common values are more and more increasingly becoming important between your employees and your customers.
That's right. I think that's very true. And as someone that's joined the workforce, I think during that period of millennials joining the workforce, I see that in my network as well, that there's that missions drive decisions just as much as the surface level opportunities, especially in strong economies, right? Like how do we make a difference? How do we choose between opportunities? And ultimately, we want to be part of doing something every day, waking up every day, focusing on solving a problem that's challenging, but also with a team and with an organization that has a mission that's bigger than us.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the passion, you have a burnout.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where we see the burnout, right? Because you don't naturally want to focus on solving those problems.
Exactly. So I think if you get people who are passionate about what you do, your company does, they perform long hours and still don't feel tired, which is why people who have a startup business, they're driven by their passion to do whatever, serve the society, create value, whatever their mission is, but they're passionate, so they work very hard and they don't feel tired in the process. And today the jobs are getting so tough that unless you have a passion and a purpose in your work, you will have a burnout.
That's right. Professor, as we wrap up today, I think it might be nice for individuals to hear, as they are part of several corporate ecosystems themselves, what can each person do in their own way to bring a customer-centric mindset to work? And what can each person do? Because obviously some folks, they might be working in a 10,000 person company. And so, instilling immediate change at the highest levels might be difficult. But what can each person do within their smaller teams to bring that dimension on a customer focus to the work that they're doing every day?
I think there are 2 or 3 things that can be done. One would be to have in your own team, just become mindful or conscious how much friction we have in serving the customers. Most of them has nothing to do with the people side, but more the processes side. Sometimes the systems. So in banking, for example, is the legacy systems that comes in the way. Or the banks have processes, partly due to regulation, clearly, which comes in the way. So you now basically say to your team, let's identify, and I would say in your weekly meeting, take about 5-10 minutes to say, let's talk about today's customer challenge. What is it that the customers, either based upon complaints and the feedback you get on social media, for example, the reviews and the ratings, and what can we do? Is it anything that we can do ourselves that we can fix it, or can we elevate as a chronic problem across the organization? Can we do that thing? It's very becoming common in hospitality industry, hotel, motel now, where a complaint from a customer actually is owned by all of the functional areas. So the lobby, oh yeah, and it is basically either you give the voice of the customer, as it is called. So either the customers leave their message or an email or whatever they do, somebody takes the responsibility. I own this problem. And then they talk among themselves and resolve the problem pretty much, okay? Almost dynamically, real time if possible, because customer may be still in the hotel and complaining about, and there are so many things. It's a complex business. I mean, service business is a complex business. I mean, there are so many issues that come in from what you eat in a restaurant, for example, or to a server who did not serve you well. And unfortunately, and this is the part that I really worry about, I think what used to be a nice thing to do now is becoming more necessity because we see tremendous amount of marketplace violence. People are so angry. So there's a road rage and there's a market rage. I mean, you see in airlines, how many trigger points? People are just stressed out.
Yeah.
And they're attacking the flight attendants, for example, which is not the behavior we showed in. And it's very interesting to watch. And you simply say, this is disbelief. So having customer centricity diffuses many of the longer term issues in the process, and quite. So having that suggestion, in fact, in many ways, customer centricity becomes from a manager's viewpoint, people who run teams and at the executive level also, is more like a de-risking the corporation.
Yeah, that's a great way to phrase it.
Any one of these incidents can escalate to a level where you ultimately end up paying enormous money just to fix it, even though it may not be your fault. So I think that's why. So de-risking is the main mechanism why we have been advocating customer centricity is more and more necessary going in the future.
That's fantastic. And so that, those are fantastic kind of last words that everyone can take a piece of what they heard today and take it into the office. And even if they're not making a corporate-wide difference, maybe they work in customer service, maybe they work in marketing, and they're able to bring that lens within their smaller org. And who knows, it may become more and more pervasive once the teams start to see the success of that group or division within the larger organization. So definitely appreciate those words. I'm not seeing any kind of final Q&A here. Professor, any other items that I didn't touch on that you'd like to just cover? Otherwise, I can't thank you enough for your time and energy. I found the conversation riveting, and I was frankly taking notes myself because there were some gems of feedback that I think we could even instill further at upGrad, as upGrad is very much trying to be as customer-centric as possible. And we'll continue to go down that path because I think it's an evolution. You never perfect it, you're always working at it. Absolutely.
It's basically what the Japanese call Kanban, continuous improvement, continuous. There's no upper limit of how much you can do, but you try to reach there pretty much. I've also enjoyed very much, Karan. You are a great moderator, interviewer. Conversation went by. it felt like we were just conversing and we can continue forever, but we all have time limits to do other things. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being a great interviewer.
Thank you, Professor Sheth. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day, and we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. And thank you to the speaker and the moderator for a very beautiful and engaging conversation. Professor Sheth, you took me back to my B school lessons on, I think, across operations, finance, and marketing. With the last bit that you spoke about, Kanban was an operations class that I remembered. But yeah, thank you for some amazing examples throughout the session. And I think the attendees would agree. Very quickly launching the exit poll just to understand how we added value to all of you here.
Yeah.
And also do visit upgrad.com and check out the different programs that we have. A lot of what Professor Sheth and Karan spoke about today is already being covered in forms of amazing courses that upGrad provides across management, digital marketing, and even finance certifications.
Did you forget to mention customer centricity as a course you're up?
Oh, absolutely. That's one on the table as well.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
so everybody's given us a 5 on 5, Professor Sheth. We are like the most customer centric session, I would call it.
Oh, thank you so much. So nice to meet you, all of you, and so nice to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Professor. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.